Before we start this podcast, I want to say that every project I have pretty much has a village behind it, and this one is no exception. I want to thank the patrons who stepped in on my Kickstarter to really make sure that this got off the ground. Denise Grady, Caden White Wadham, Amanda Peak, Todd A. Davis, Jay Grant, and Corey Watson. Without you guys, I wouldn't be sitting here talking with the awesome guest that I'm about to talk to. Thank you so much. I thought about starting off my episode today with a Romulan word of the day, just to kind of make you feel at home. And since you do the Klingon word of the day,
that would be great.
That would have been, but that was thought of about 2 minutes before I hit join on the podcast. So I was like, not today, but maybe one day.
Welcome to It's Your Loss podcast, where raw stories of resilience and healing are told, all while uncovering and destigmatizing the diverse symptoms of loss.
Welcome back to the podcast. If you missed last month's episode, well, it's your loss. I'm host Michael LeBlanc, and I am here with podcaster, stand-up comedian, extraordinary guy all around, and he smells vaguely like chocolate chip cookies. I don't know what that's about, but it's amazing. Everybody say hello to Todd A. Davis. Todd.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing well, man. I'm doing well.
Bring me on, man. I'm really excited about this.
I'm very excited for it to have you on, because I was on a podcast beforehand, but you showed me what a professional podcaster is. You gave me a script, which I did not give you. You always sound good. The video is, vaguely nerdy, especially when you're ready to go. But right now, I'm seeing some weird, some chords and whatnot,
Yeah, I can't decide what to do with these little LED lights. That's what this string is. But I have my Star Trek comics.
You do.
I've got a broken TARDIS lava lamp.
Oh, that is what that is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
I have some Marvel hardcovers. My D&D stuff. I have some horror movies stuff. I have my Walking Dead collection. I have the Enterprise B, C, and D over my head,
which are holding up the LED strands. Good use for them.
Exactly. So yeah, my office is just chock full of nerdy fun things. And it is a mess, just like my personality.
Well, I love it. The time that I came over there, man, I just walked around there, and every corner of that little space that I saw resonated with me on a very nerdy level. And speaking of things that be considered nerdy, one of the things that you're actually going to be the first person that I try this out on, there's a spot on my sign-on sheet that says what your favorite game is. And ideally what I was going to do was play over Zoom games, and that's not going to work because I feel like it takes away from the conversation, and also it's the whole thing. So I scrapped that. So instead, you said that your favorite game, according to this, was Super Mario Brothers Wii.
Oh, yes.
And so I took it upon myself to print out the horoscope as it pertains to Mario. And what I need to know from you, what is your birthday?
December the 26th, day after Christmas. While you look that up, would you like to hear the joke I tell everybody when they find out I'm a Christmas baby?
Oh, please.
So the person says, oh, you're a Christmas baby. I go, yeah, mom and dad actually did a really good job of making sure that, it was a very special time for me. On Christmas, I got really great gifts, and then the next day I got the batteries to put in them. Professional comedian,
everybody
available for parties, bar mitzvahs, corporate events.
You can't hear it, but I'm sure there's a room full of laughter for you out there. Somebody's applauding for you. All right,
that's the running motif my entire comedy career. Somewhere there's a room full of people laughing. Just not here.
I tell my wife all the time, is you don't have to laugh at my jokes for me to know I'm funny. I am hilarious. All the way at the back of the page, because obviously, end of the year, you have to make me flip all the pages to get there. According to this, so you are a Capricorn.
Yes.
Okay, that one is right. Good. That means this is from a reputable website. It says you're King Boo. And you tell me how well this fits you. Also known as the Master of Illusions. King Boo is the main antagonist from the Luigi Mansion series. King Boo is the Bowser of the Luigi games. Why? Okay, they're harping on that. I should have pre-read this. Good fit for the Capricorn zodiac sign, the Bowser of Januaries. What? I should have vetted this. Anyway, as someone who controls over the Boos, it says that King Boo, here we go, is a good manager. However, one of King Boo's weaknesses, however, is he's unforgiving. I don't know. I think I know you a little bit, Todd. I'm not feeling that one.
I have been known to hold a grudge or two occasionally. As I'm getting older, I'm realizing grudges are not worth holding on to. So I am slowly letting those go. Master of Illusions, I feel like putting on a face to do stand-up comedy, putting on a decent face, a voice to do podcasting,
sure,
is a little bit of a magic trick. You got to kind of put forth your best foot or your best voice, or you got to at least fake it till you make it. As much praise as you gave me at the beginning for the professionalism of my podcast, I have been on podcasts before, and for years before starting my own.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of a combination of, hey, I see this show is doing a certain thing, and here's what I like. These are the things I don't like, so let's lose that. And
sure.
then I would appear on another show, same thing. Oh, these are the things I like, get rid of the rest. And I did that a couple of other times, and by the time it came down to start mine, it was kind of, all right, I'm going to make notes. I'm not going to be married to them because I don't want it to sound like I'm reading off of a cue card, because if I start reading something, it's going to sound pre-rehearsed, and it's just it's going to fall flat. So I do like the spontaneous nature of a real conversation, but at the same time, I kind of set a goal for myself of, I want to have some of the Star Trek actors. I want to have some scientists. I want to have some authors. And some of these folks may or may not have done podcasts before, or have a certain public image to keep up.
Yeah, they got to project a little bit.
Exactly. So I wanted to put those notes together and send them so that they are the most comfortable that they can be in this particular environment, talking to somebody they may not know.
Yeah.
So, in doing that, I mean, you've been the recipient of my notes a few times, and they are pretty thorough, but at the same time, there's enough room in there for casual conversation.
Plenty of flexibilities. So while we're talking, I flipped over to mine, which I was born May 7th. It's a Taurus. And the one that I'm pretty happy about, my favorite color is green, forest green specifically. But evidently, Yoshi is the Taurus of the Mario world, tends to make friends with other members of the same species, commonly seen as green, one of the Taurus's favorite two colors. Oh, I didn't realize that was that simple. Okay, I'm basic. All right, cool. Since Yoshi loves to touch and taste people and objects around him, he matches his Taurus as well. His uncanny resemblance between a Taurus and Yoshi tells us he was fit to be this zodiac sign. So that's what Mario can teach us. I love to taste people, and I love the color green.
Hey, you know what?
I'm a whore, Todd.
There's people in this world that pay a lot of money to be tasted.
That's true. And pay people a lot of money to get tasted. So that's nice. I could read it off for you, but I think it would sound better coming from you, Todd. What have you lost in life?
Well, two big things spring to mind. The first is maybe a bit abstract, but the loss of opportunity as a younger person.
Yeah.
Growing up, I was very outgoing and creative to a point where I started to show inclinations toward creative writing and storytelling and acting. But those things were not encouraged by anyone really in my life at that point. And I'm talking probably high school years, the formative years.
Sure.
Now, and even, and all of that stuff, even into stand-up, like I just turned 40. I am one
Happy
of the
birthday.
thank you. I am one of the ancient relics at the stand-up comedy club amongst a bunch of 20 somethings all getting up there to tell their jokes. And I think to myself, gosh, I'm not quite at a decade of doing stand-up, but what if I had started 10 years earlier? What if, would have happened? Where would I be creatively? If I had pursued acting with all the gusto that I did other things in my life, where would I be? Where would I be with that? Creative writing. Had I pursued, hell, something as simple as an English degree in college, when you're supposed to go to college right
Sure.
after high school.
That's what they tell you. Yeah.
Yeah, they tell you to do that. Well, sort of. They heavily imply that, but if you're a little thick like me, it doesn't really take. But basically, it was because I'm the youngest of three,
Mhm.
and so my parents had me when they were in their 40s, and they just kind of it's 13 years between me and my next oldest brother.
Oh, wow.
So they kind of let my brothers and Looney Tunes from the 40s raise me. Now, that gave me a unique perspective being raised in a house full of adults and watching cartoons during the day, like I said, Looney Tunes
Sure.
from the 40s,
Yeah.
but then hanging out with my brothers who were in their teens. Actually, by the time I came around, my oldest brother had already moved out. He's 20 years older than me.
Oh, wow.
They had us generations apart. But by the time I was 3, 4, 5 years old and hanging out with my middle brother Chris,
Yeah.
Jim is my oldest brother. He was watching David Letterman, Saturday Night Live, The
Because
Kids
he
in
was
the Hall.
like 18, 19 by that point, right? 18.
Yeah, 17, 18, 19. Yeah. Those two things combined sort of gave me my sense of humor and my style of comedy. I've always had trouble describing myself and my comedy style,
Right.
but someone else said that my style is highbrow silly. And I love that. It's so compact, but knowing my background of Looney Tunes and late night stand up, like that kind of fits.
Yeah,
So
that track.
yeah. The way I've kind of gotten around the idea of losing that opportunity is when I look at myself next to these 20-something-year-old comedians who are doing their jokes, I'm coming to it with the perspective of an additional 20 years of life. I'm being married for over a decade, and
You have more to pull from. Your bag of tricks is a little more full than these 20-something people who are getting on stage. Well,
exactly.
I mean, I don't know all their lives, but I feel like I could make a safe assumption with that.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the first thing, the loss of potential life. I guess it was the loss of an alternate reality for me.
Sure.
Somewhere out there's a Todd who's either on SNL or directing films or acting in films or doing something like that, or writing comic books or something. But the other big part was the loss of my mom when I was 19. She got sick the summer after I graduated high school. A year later, she was gone. She had a disease called scleroderma. The term literally means a hardening of the skin, and it shows up in like your hands. They kind of turn white and they get hard to the touch.
Yeah.
Mom actually had it in her lungs. In the end, the lungs couldn't get the oxygen into the blood, and which caused her to have a heart attack and die.
There's not much coming back after when your body decides to not bring in oxygen.
Yeah.
Which I can relate. My mom passed away from COPD, which, I mean, she was bringing in the oxygen, but the CO2 was staying afterwards. And so it was just kind of like a quiet good night, basically. She went to bed, and yeah.
Jeez Louise.
So I feel you with the loss of your mom. I don't want to treat this like a game of poker, but I think I can one-up you with the loss of my father as well. Though I feel like, the older you get, though, the more you can just keep pulling out of a deck of cards that you've been slowly building over life. It's like, all right, here's mom, here's dad, here's an in-law,
Oh, sure.
I would feel that, in that deck of cards, you also have the more abstract stuff. So it's cool that you started off with the abstract, because when a lot of people talk about what they lost, in life, they want to talk about the people. They want to talk about the physical stuff. I haven't yet talked to a person who has had a loss of a limb, but there is a guy that, I may be talking to that was born without them. So he kind of came with a deck that was already started for him. And
Wow.
yeah, the things that he's done with his life, he's an inspirational speaker. He's a stand-up comedian. He's an author. I mean, he's living his life, and he's a lot lighter than a lot of us because of the limbs that he doesn't have. And like I said, I really hope to get him on the show. We've got people out there searching for him, asking for him. Who would you say were your biggest naysayers, your biggest obstacle makers? How did you get around them?
I think the easiest one to point to is probably school guidance counselor. I was one of those kids that on graduation day, you walk up, they hand you the little leather bound folder thing,
Oh
and
yeah,
you shake the hand, you go
yeah.
back to your seat. I was the one who opened it, saw that it was in there, took a big sigh of relief, and then relaxed. But yeah, a school guidance counselor, I think a conversation or two, or hell, just looking at my grades, barely passing math, barely passing science, doing pretty decent in English. Oh, he's really good at chorus, really good at acting. Like,
Ooh.
that should probably be a discussion. Mom and dad, they are the definition of boomers. My father was born in the 40s, served in Vietnam, more of a practical mentality of, well, that's all well and good, but you need a tangible skill. You need, something that you can, a
You, you,
trade that you
you
can
need a
teach.
trade, boy. You need a trade.
Exactly,
Right.
exactly.
Just taking a small break to tell you that this episode of the podcast is brought to you by Dink, spelled D-I-N-Q, D&D in the coffin hold of the USS Enterprise. It's my first book, a memoir in which I tell you about trying and failing in the Navy's school for nuclear operators, all while juggling marriage and depression. Where does D&D come in? It's woven all throughout the book. Check it out on Amazon as a paperback or on Kindle. The link's in the description below.
And it was kind of encouraging some time ago. I mean, I was still living at home, but I ran across an article about Robin Williams, who his father, the same way.
I heard that before, yeah.
Yeah, take up a trade, and he became a welder. Fast forward a few years to, I had a short-term job working as a welder's spotter, basically making fire watch. That's why I was
Okay.
fire
Yeah,
watch
yeah,
for
yeah.
a welder, which basically involves standing there watching the guy do the thing and making sure he doesn't catch on fire. But at the same time, do a Google search of what a general welder makes. It's pretty decent money.
Right.
So looking at that, I kind of wish someone had the conversation, either my dad or a school guidance counselor, to say, hey, look, you're doing these creative things that are great. It's going to be very difficult to earn money in the arts. That's the
Right.
reality. Here are some simple things that you can do that will put you in a better position to earn money down the road. One of them, I was already involved in martial arts. Seriously, if you're listening to this and you have young kids, martial arts isn't on their radar. When they are done with 8th grade, get them involved in martial arts. They'll have a black belt by the time they go to college. And that looks good on a college transcript. And it also looks good on your resume and job applications.
That would have looked good on my resume or job applications, but I was doing martial arts. I was just doing like a simple karate class, and I was showing them like a certain stretch, just a simple back bend, and a little too far. My diaphragm seized on me, and so I fall over, and I'm like having a coffee fit. They think I've hurt myself. And so they use that. They told me at the time, it's like, well, you hurt yourself just doing this simple thing. You can't do karate. So they took me out of it. Turns out that we had to run because of the dealer that they had been getting their weed from. They had smoked it instead of sold it. And so we had to run, and so we can no longer be in that area and go to that karate class. I wouldn't find that out until way later, and I thank them for holding that information from me until I was old enough to understand. But yes, you're right. Like following through with that is, yeah, it looks great.
And even, going back to, certain trades, like being able to weld or being able to drive a forklift.
Sure. Forklift certification. That's where it's at.
A CDL. If you got a CDL, you'll make money.
Keep talking these sexy things to me, and this is going to turn into a different podcast.
I worked with a comedian who had a day job at a bank. They were a bank teller. And at the time, I still had my 9 to 5, which was paralegal. And I said, "Are you a notary?" They said, "No." I was like, "Trust me, spend the $25 to become a notary." And it's with you for a decade.
You are correct.
You can leverage it for a little pay bump.
Any notary public that I've ever had to find in my life is like they're doing the most other non-paperwork related things. One time I found out the person I had been slinging burgers with for like the greater part of 3 years was a notary public, and I'm sitting there, I just happened to mention to him I needed one. They're like, "Dude, I got you." He came in the other day, had his whole case and his stamp. He's like, "What you need? What you need? Hey, you come here, watch this. We're gonna get this handled. All right, now let's hurry up. We got lunch rush." It's great. And it's so useful. It's so helpful. A trade, any kind of trade. My goodness. Yeah. I mean, I'm slowly trying to do more creative stuff between writing my book, doing this podcast, doing social media creation. And I still have my 9 to 5, which is a wonderful job. It's the first long-term office job I've ever had.
Oh,
it's still not where I thought I was going to be. For the longest time, I thought I was going to be an architect. I went to school for that. I went to ITT Tech for that. And now, if you know anything about ITT Tech, you realize how boned I am now. I can't do anything with that.
No.
I was ready for it. You see, for me, it was more along the lines of just flowing along, I think, until I found the right thing to float in. And not a lot of people on my end telling me that I couldn't do things, which is why I think I've tried to do so many different things along the way until I found something that I'm comfortable, happy, and thriving in. Which I'm hoping that's where you feel that you are right now.
Yeah, it's a lot to keep up with. I am pretty much in the position of when I talk to someone about my podcast, they go, "Oh, how do you do it?" I was like, if it's not me, I'm having to ask someone, and out of the goodness of their heart, they are giving me their time and their creative efforts. Because when it comes to scheduling the show, writing the script, booking the guests, hosting, recording, editing, producing, uploading, hosting, and then promoting, that's all me. Now I have some folks who have done some promotional episode cards for me. My good friend of many, many years at this point, Justin Bishop, is very creative. I think he even went to school for graphic design. I told him what I was doing, and he creates these beautiful episode cards that have all the info and the logo and the whole thing. And, and they look gorgeous. Again, he's a dear friend who, out of the goodness of his heart, here you go. And he cranks them out for me. I've offered to pay him.
Those kind of people are godsends, man.
Oh yeah. I have offered to pay him on more than one occasion. And he's like, "No, man, I got you. So, okay. All right." He also did my intro music, which incorporates some sound clips, Star Trek franchise.
I was just listening to your last episode, actually, and I normally skip most people's beginning podcasts because I've listened to it for so much. But when within, what is it, like the first 5-6 seconds, you hear Cisco say, "This is a massive win for the good guys." I think I'm getting that wrong. But yeah, just the way that he says it, and it just brings me into the whole experience, and I'm just sitting there just listening to the whole thing again. The guy did a great job.
Yeah. Justin put that together for me. He's also been podcasting. I think he and my other podcaster in crime, Gary Horn, who the three of us, Gary, Justin, and myself, were all co-hosts of Cinema Shock.
Yeah.
Justin's a big movie fan. So is Gary. I see a lot of movies, but I'm kind of the fresh perspective. Gary, he works with the National Wrestling Alliance, so he kind of gets the inside track, and Justin is the historian. So between the three of us, and we've all been friends for at least 20 years at this point, we do Cinema Shock, where we cover cult and genre film history, and so we get into the stories behind the stories of your favorite filmmakers. And that's been fun. But, Justin and Gary started that podcast probably, I want to say at least a year before I joined, which was probably at least another year or two before I started my own, probably getting the timeline wrong, but they've been at it much
No
longer
one
than
will
I
know.
Yeah, no, nobody's going to know. I was able to draw on their wealth of knowledge in terms of hardware, software, tips for doing interviews. I mentioned Gary works with the National Wrestling Alliance. He does a lot of their backstage interviews with these wrestlers who just got finished with their matches and stuff, so they're out of breath, they're sweaty, and hey, come answer a couple questions on camera. So that takes a little bit of chutzpah, but be able to stick a microphone in somebody's face and get those special moments before they head off to the locker room or something is pretty important. One of the things I did before this is turning into a how to podcast, but
don't worry, I'll turn it around at some point, I promise.
Okay. One of the things I did as I was trying to beef up my resume in terms of writing and creative endeavors was I was and still am playing fantasy football. And I thought, you know what, why don't I do like some sports writing?
Yeah.
And I started covering a local high school and a local Division II college football team.
Mm-hmm.
And that was another great boot camp in terms of, can you keep writing? Because I was the only one in the press box without a laptop. So I was handwriting everything.
And OG, nice.
Oh, yeah. And then as the game wound down, I had to fight my way through the crowds to get down to the field to grab a couple quotes from star player, the coach, somebody, and do all of that, get back to the house, put the finishing touches on the article, and send it off before midnight. And
wow,
that is tough to do.
That's
twice a week for 10 to 12 weeks in a row.
I'm feeling tired just thinking about that workload, my guy.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, one thing about being creative and wanting to pump things out and trying to stay on a schedule is like knowing how long it takes to either write something down or edit it. The long time in between conception and presentation. Hell, that alone, I guess I could probably turn into like a loss of time, because think of how much time we've spent staring at screens and whatnot. What could we have been doing with our life?
Oh, sure. It also kind of put me in the position to be more creative with my use of time. So high school plays Friday nights. College, more often than not, plays Saturday,
right? I know that much.
Yeah. So after the weekend, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I was looking up the rosters. I was even writing some tentative titles for the article based on the mascots and the names of the school. So I've got them ready to go for multiple different scenarios, whether it was close or whether it was, a big blowout, both directions of who won. So I tried to do my due diligence of like, okay, here's my titles, and, do as much work as I could beforehand so that I could focus on the game and the stats for that particular evening. And it was it was really sobering sitting in the press box next to another writer. And I was like, okay, well, have a good night. And I was just out of curiosity, when's your deadline? And he goes, 10 minutes ago. I was like, oh my God, okay. I don't think the game was over yet, but geez Louise. Before then, I would sit and stare at screens and really take my time, sit on every word and and would go back and rewrite things, trying to get it in that final form.
Right.
And I think one thing that the sports writing taught me was just do it. Just put it out. And you might get a chance to do a second draft.
Yeah.
But you got to be on top of your game so that you can crank this thing out and get it in on time. And that, I think, taught me to not be so precious with my words so that I can, bringing it back, afford to lose words that I would hold dear.
Because you got to let go of some things sometimes.
Yeah.
Especially say like writers, the things that they write. Think how much they spend, creating these characters, these situations, these worlds, if they're a fiction writer, or flow of ideas if they're, say, I wanted to say a fact writer, that's not a thing, a nonfiction writer, and then getting down to the final thing and realizing, I probably have to like cut or reshape all of this. That alone, I think, could probably start. I've had to cut and shape things, and I have like the moments of like anger and like, why did you write like that? And then regrets. And then, I just like flow through grief the whole time. One of the things we were talking about before we actually jumped in here, we were talking about writing in general and how authors. I've written one book. I've got 2/3 of a first draft floating somewhere out there in the world, which this November I'll be hitting hard again. We were talking about, you said, hey, leave your book on a shelf, 10 years, come back to it. And I can only imagine what I'm going to see and how I'm going to feel about that when I see it. You mentioned that you thought about rewriting some of your old stories as you were looking at them. And I was thinking, like, what if some of like the bigger authors, thought like that? I would love to pick Brandon Sanderson's brain, because his style is most of all the same when it comes to fantasy. I mean, obviously, his books are wildly different from each other. They're all connected by his cossphere, but his first book, it felt so blocky and compared to what he's got now. And I love the man's work. I really do. But I wonder if he ever goes back and he's like, man, if I had the time, would I rewrite that novel? And I don't know. I think maybe he kind of thinks of it as kind of like the first, stepping stones of what he was starting to create.
I remember trying to read Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire. I loved the movie. I was like, you know what? If this is the movie, imagine the book. And I could not get through the first 10 pages. Listen, I don't need 3 pages of you describing Louis' shirt.
Yeah.
Let's move it along. So, I always wonder if there was, rest in peace, Anne Rice, but like, I wonder if she had ever thought about taking it back to formula and, seeing, because I mean, the movie is such a well told and well cut together narrative.
It's very well presented. I don't know how much she had to do with the actual movie adaptation itself. I would imagine at that time a pretty good deal.
Yeah.
And watch me like Google it later and be completely wrong, but it always helps to have somebody who, when you're making into kind of like a different format, they've got like a couple of writers going, well, that's great that this works in the book, but we can't describe her internal thought process for 45 minutes while everything else happens around them. This is not how this isn't going to work. I think because of that, team that probably helped out with that was instrumental to getting everybody to know the story of Interview with the Vampire.
Yeah. And now that I think about it, I think she might have been the credited screenwriter. So maybe the movie was her second crack at it.
Maybe it was.
It may have been. I'm a better writer fan would
yeah, right.
That off the top.
Luckily for us, this isn't a writing podcast. Having that said, let's just shift tones completely before we run out of room. You mentioned that your mom passing was one of your other losses. How recent?
Well, I was 19 and I just turned 40, so we're talking, 20 years ago.
Okay. So you're 19 years old. You're let's be honest, most of us, they want to say that you're an adult by the time you hit 18 because it's very important for legal reasons. By the time you're 18, you can do a lot. But emotionally, let's be honest, you don't really start solidifying until you're like your mid-20s. Fair way to ask it, how did your mom's death shape your life?
It didn't really hit me at first until it didn't hit me until I saw her in the box.
Yeah.
And that was kind of, let me back up and just say, living here in South Carolina, we are in the buckle of the Bible Belt, church on every corner. So raised.
Trust me, I know. You live close to Pickens that, if an ice cream shop closes down, boom, it's now a church. So I understand.
Being raised in that environment and going to school in that environment, my father graduated from Bob Jones University, which, listeners, if you don't know, take a second, Google it.
Google
It's
it.
kind of, yeah, it's kind of a big deal
And
in
if
terms of like Southern Baptist educational institutions.
Yeah, if you want to be drenched in it, go there and visit their museum sometime. It's a very well curated museum.
Yeah. It is actually like one of the best religious art museums in the world.
Yeah.
Like it's really nice.
So much so, we went there with my agnostic, sarcastic friend of mine who she was like, "Hey, for a laugh, let's go to Bob Jones." And I'm like, "What do you mean for a laugh? Like, what do you think is going to happen there?" She's like, "I bet it's going to be so funny." Even she was kind of like sombered and humble as she was going through. It's like, holy crap, this is really well done.
Yeah. Being raised in that and then seeing my mother in the casket, I felt a big sense of betrayal by my faith. Having a father who was at least neglected by his parents,
Sure,
causing him to say, "Well, fuck the world, I'm going to Nam." Am I allowed to curse? I don't.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I've lifted the PG-13 band on this specifically, so.
Okay, cool. But yeah, he just said, fuck it to the world and went and joined the military.
Yeah.
And then when things were starting to get a certain way in the military, he said, "Well, screw that. I'm going somewhere else." And then he went to Bob Jones and got his master's of divinity, was on track to be a preacher, and at a certain turn. Yeah. Oh,
divinity.
yeah.
Wow.
Masters of divinity. Yeah. And at a certain turn, he rejected that as well, which Bob Jones isn't cheap.
It is not.
which put our family into poverty. You can imagine being a Vietnam veteran and then diving headfirst into a religious belief that you're really not 100% invested in.
Sure.
You can imagine how my father treated my mother. Not great.
Gotcha.
So when she passed away, my initial thought was, like I said, of betrayal, but the overarching theme was you took the wrong, to God, you took the wrong parent.
Wow.
And that gave me a big crisis of faith. And I think it was my first real big loss.
Yeah.
As a young man growing up. That kind of set me down a path of dark emotions and dark thoughts. And, at that point, I was heavily into martial arts, which, as good as martial arts is, you're still engaging in hand-to-hand combat. You're still engaging in violence, which does certain things to you.
That's true.
Yeah.
You can only do that for so long, time after time, without having some kind of kickback on your system.
Exactly. So was, kind of stewing in this dark, emotional, psychological sludge. Finally, I started putting pen to paper and I wrote my first comic book. It was sort of just dumping all of this negativity out on the page.
Sure.
And it's so...
How long in between your mom's passing and the ink to page?
I finished it roughly a year after she passed away. So in that time, probably once the dust settled, got started on it maybe a month after she had passed away.
Okay.
And then just cranked it out. The interesting thing is I distinctly recall, as I'm on that last page, typing the words "the end."
Yeah.
And as soon as I hit that last E or that D, I'm good at spelling.
It's the old English version of the end.
Yeah, exactly. But as soon as I hit that last letter, it was like someone came up behind me and took a big heavy backpack off of my shoulders. It was a bizarre feeling, but I was like, I think I'm okay. I think I'm not okay, but I'm better.
Starting to heal, maybe. Yeah.
And then the guilt set in.
Yeah.
Because I was feeling better when my father had lost his partner of 40 years. My brothers had lost their mother as well.
Yeah.
And I was starting to rebound. Now, granted, I was much younger and kids tend to bounce back from these things faster than someone older. But I took that draft and I showed it to a friend of mine, a childhood friend of mine, who also knew my family and knew my mother as well.
Right.
He was going to, he's a great guy. He's now a tattoo artist, Jason Bunner. He's, shout out to Jason. At the time, he was in school at Winthrop University
Okay.
and getting an art degree. He's graphic design artist. He's, as I mentioned, he's now a tattoo artist. Art has been his whole life.
Right.
So I showed it to him and he said, "You have to let me do the artwork for this." And at the time, I didn't even really structure it like a comic script. It was just sort of a brain dump of a narrative on paper. And he said, "You got to let me do the artwork for this." I said, "Okay, for what?" He goes, "Well, my thesis is coming up for school and I need a subject. And because we're friends, because I knew your mom, I'm also into comics. I'm a big comic book guy myself." He goes, "You got to let me do this." I said, "Okay, yeah, sure. It's yours."
That's a huge subject to use as a thesis, as raw and emotional and as powerful as that is.
Yeah.
I could see why he saw that and was like, this would be perfect. That's
Yeah. And
wow.
the nice thing is he did it beautifully. The artwork's wonderful.
Oh, that's great.
And because his parents saw it as a school project, they footed the bill for printing in full color,
All right.
a hardback edition. I think we produced 6 copies total. I've got 2 of them. They're on my shelf.
Hey,
And
nice.
yeah, it was really nice. But like we said before we started to roll, certain things happened in the editing process. Things got changed a little bit here and there. And even just in my own personal growth as a writer, as a storyteller, if I were to tell the same story today, they'd be worlds apart.
Of course.
And I've considered going back and doing a second pass at that story. And every time I get to thinking about it, I see it sitting on my shelf and then I take a second guess and I'm just actually, no, I don't want to revisit that. So the loss of my mother gave me this book, but because I've let those feelings and emotions go, because I've lost those, I'm not going to do another version. So that's a lost version that will never be seen or read.
I guess.
Yeah. So the bad turned into something good.
Yeah.
Wanting to revisit it's probably a bad idea, which is actually probably good for me.
And the monkey and the weasel keep chasing each other around the tree.
Exactly.
Well, so it sounds like to me that your coping mechanism, it probably mostly centers around creation, which is great. I mean, a lot of people have different methods, different modes. Mine seem to be creation as well. The whole reason I started the Sitting With You, which at the point was called Sitting With Michael platform at all, was to deal with the emotions after my mom passed, which has been much more recent. It's been 6, 7, 8 years. 8 years. Had it not been for that, I wouldn't have started doing vlogs and I wouldn't have started thinking about doing videos and then all this. You look back at it, the path looks very, nominal. You're like, okay, I can see exactly where all this happened. But at the time, man, you're forcing your way through.
Yeah. Hindsight's a funny thing.
It really is.
You even know that as a younger person. It's a common phrase. And okay, I know what that means. But then when you get there, like now I'm 40, looking at the 20-year-old Todd going, "What were you thinking, man?"
Thanks for not doing anything too stupid. Thank you for me still being here, 20-year-old me. However, you're a fucking moron.
Right. So quick diversion into a funny story about thank you, I'm still here.
Yeah.
During our trip to the UK, we landed in Edinburgh December 21st. And that's where we spent.
This last year. Yeah.
Exactly. That's where we spent Christmas and my 40th birthday. It was an absolute blast. I got stories for days about that.
I enjoyed.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that was some good stuff. Just before we got on the train to go to London, we stopped at a little pub and I said, some of the things are different here. I'm not a big Bailey's drinker, but you see it all over the place Bailey's there in the UK.
It was advertised pretty heavily the last time I went. Yeah.
Yeah. So I said, you know what? Let me get an Irish coffee. And they brought the Baileys. And the guy brought it from around the bar. We were there at a very slow time of the day, so there were only a few people there. He brought it over and I said, I actually used to work at a still and we made a product similar to Bailey's. It was fresh cream, rum, and a 5-grain bourbon as opposed to cream and Irish whiskey.
Right.
He's like, really? I said, yeah. And then I started to tell him the different cocktails that I used to make with that.
Yeah.
And at one point, and I will wear this as a badge of pride, a Scottish bartender leaned over to my wife and said, "How's this fucker still alive?"
You're right. You should wear that as a badge of honor. That's
I do,
great.
yeah.
That's great.
Sorry, a little rabbit
That's
trail
great.
there, but yeah,
That's
fun.
great. I try to find one big question after the conversation, and you pretty much, like, during one, I got to ask about, do you feel glad at all that your mom died? I mean, that was just a huge question I got to ask somebody. So to you, obviously that's not the question, but do you ever find yourself revisiting the guilt, or how much guilt do you even have about the idea of thinking you took the wrong parent while you were looking at your mom?
In a sense, some point, I don't recall when, but I don't want to say I repaired my religious thoughts and beliefs, my faith, but I redefined them and restructured them and have a better understanding in my own heart and mind of this life when juxtaposed with whatever comes next.
Sure.
That being said, because my father treated my mother the way he did,
yeah,
I've begun to look at myself in my own marriage and how I treat my wife and my friends, my colleagues and coworkers.
Right.
And there was a time where I thought, gosh, Dad never trained me, didn't teach me it. He didn't teach me a goddamn thing. But at some point it changed into, I know what not to do.
Yeah.
So learning that, thinking that was a loss of instruction has turned into a big gain of knowledge, of avoidance of a pretty big pitfall.
Dude,
when your wife tries to talk to you, the television,
yeah.
Get off the couch once in a while.
I hear you. I resonate with that so much, actually. Yeah.
The other part of it is, and maybe a little more someone who was raised in religion, you always hear the phrase of vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. I don't know the book, chapter, and verse.
That's okay.
But that is,
I don't either.
In thinking that God took the wrong parent, my view on that changed as well, in that Dad has to deal with the loss. His punishment is he's survived. He has to live. He has to keep living. He learned really quickly that the friends of Pat and Walt Davis were actually the friends of Pat Davis.
Pat Davis, yeah.
And they went away real quick. And now, for better or for worse, he sits at home. All he wanted to do was sit in front of the TV. Well, that's all that's left. He sits in front of the TV. So he kind of, it's, as a writer, who gains perspective, you learn to appreciate poetic justice. That's kind of it.
I gotta commend you for the strength of realizing that not everything that happens negative in your life is necessarily negative to you. Sometimes you're just there when negative shit happens, and it may affect your life, but it doesn't necessarily have to shape your life to in the same kind of bell curve that happens once that negativity happens.
Yeah.
That's a great strength, Todd.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's, look, anybody who's listening, neither one of us have said anything about it being easy.
No, it's not.
It stings like a motherfucker, let me tell you. But, again, with perspective, with time, the hurt doesn't go away, but it becomes easier to deal with.
Yeah.
and the heaviness gets lighter over time. You get stronger with
Yeah.
with the heaviness on your shoulders or soul, however you want to define that. If by chance you're listening to this and you just lost somebody, nothing I say is going to make you feel any better.
It's gonna sound hollow.
They're gonna all sound like cliches, and you're just gonna roll your eyes and maybe even hit skip. Which
Yeah,
is
that's
your
right.
prerogative. But
Go ahead, advertise skipping this podcast. Do it.
yeah, I was gonna say,
dare you.
Please don't. Please don't. But just know that you're not alone. If you've got that negative energy, find something to pour it into. It can be some sort of creative project or some sort of self-improvement endeavor or something, anything. Pour it into that and you'll be surprised at how much better you feel instead of letting it sit and stew inside.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of saying that anxiety, stress, grief, all of it seems a little bit smaller once you have the chance to express it.
Yeah.
Which is great. Which I think that's a good natural closing spot right there. I was going to say, hey, you got any words of wisdom? I feel like you nailed it. Good job. Good job. You're quite welcome. Well, Todd, before I fully close this out, man, which again, thank you so much for being here in the first season of this. Where can people find you?
If you're interested in hearing me talk with my friends about fun old movies, head over to cinemashock.net. That will give you links to the show episodes as well as links for our merch and our Discord. If you want to hear me talk with a rotating panel of guests about the Star Trek franchise, please look up a Computer Resume podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts. It is at Computer Resume on all of the socials. And if you want to reach out to me directly, I'm at Mr. Todd A. Davis on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, and D&D Beyond, as long as they behave themselves.
That's great. That's great. And you might even hear my voice a couple of times on that Computer Resume podcast if you get the right episodes. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as always, this is the host, Michael LeBlanc. And if you missed next month's episodes, well, it's still going to be your loss. Thank you so much, Todd.
Thank you, Michael. This has been an absolute blast. I appreciate it, buddy.
Not a problem.